right. Hey, guys. Welcome.
Hello.
Good to see you guys. So today we have a special guest. If the title of the podcast didn't give it away, I'm about to. We are a little bit tighter in the ride to Tone Town today. Instead of the three of us in the Miata, we have picked up a hitchhiker, you could say. Marcus Catanzaro. Firstly, I feel like I always get your last name wrong, so just correct me right away, Marcus.
No, you nailed it. You actually nailed it. I think you're the only person that gets it right, funnily enough.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
This is good.
A nice Irish last name. If you couldn't tell from the accent.
Yeah, I mean, it's good you should bring up the accent. Me and Marcus met originally in Sydney. It would be, 12 years ago? Something like that. Probably early 2010s in that area.
I feel like you said 12 years last time we interviewed each
14.
other. So it's been definitely longer than 12.
Okay. Well, I'm not great on timing, but I'll try and improve today. So we've known each other for a while. Over a decade, let's say that. That's impressive. We met in Sydney when I lived there. Marcus was there. You were running an awesome studio in kind of the suburbs of Sydney. We met through a mutual friend and have kind of stayed in touch over the years. And since then, you have just done more and more with your illustrious career in both playing guitar, teching for various artists, which we're going to get into. And today you've been kind enough to come on Chairman of the Boards, and we're basically going to walk through everything that me, Mason, and Brian are doing wrong with our guitar rigs, and you're just going to cover it all in 60 minutes. And but
so
basically,
funny
give us
because
some
I
insight.
listened to this podcast to find out what I'm doing wrong, so we're all doomed.
We're all just helping each other out.
So we're gonna do like a tone facelift, Marcus, and that's sort of the intent today is that we're gonna get nipped and tucked in tone, which I think is a good thing that we can all use. I'm excited.
I'm excited too. Let's do it. Let's find out how much I thought I know that I don't.
Now,
just to get there, like right off the top, just because I'm still very impressed by this. This is probably old news for you, Marcus, in terms of it's work for you. But some of the artists you've worked with, tell me anyone that I'm missing. But essentially, the list I have here, I told you before this, I was perving your Instagram, and this is where I got my list. Listener, if you've heard of any of these guys,
raise your hand. Honk if you're on the road. Honk if you're on the road.
If you're driving, don't raise your hand.
Lenny Kravitz, Fleetwood Mac, Crowded House, Kendrick Lamar, Christina Aguilera, Steely Dan, A$AP Rocky, Camila Cabello, Childish Gambino, and one of my favorites, I have to say, although not the most well-known on this list, would be Gang of Youths, another band originally from Sydney. Does it feel weird or a little bit crazy to you to hear like, oh yeah, I'm working with the biggest names in the music industry now 15, 20 years on? Like, I mean, what's it like here in that list of artists? If I can just ask a very awkward question to get us started.
Yeah, it's pretty humbling. It's pretty wild, I think, especially because when you're from outside of the world, you grew up in music and you never assume that you will ever amount to anything much more than Australian music. Like Australian music's the pinnacle, and that's great. So it should, but the concept of living in America and working for the bands like Fleetwood or someone is, it's pretty wild to imagine. If you told 12-year-old Marcus in Western Sydney, Edmonton would be pretty blown away.
Very cool, man.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. So I'll ask one more question, then I'll pass it off to one of the other guys. Has the goal, let's say, going back to 12-year-old Marcus, if we can step into those shoes, was the goal even at 12 years old, I am going to be in the music industry in one form or another, whether it be as a guitar player or teching? Like, is this kind of the path that you had set out for yourself when you were younger, or did you kind of fumble your way into it like maybe I did? And it kind of like, here I am, and I don't know how I got here. Like, what's kind of the story, the cliff notes?
No, it was pretty much always the path. I started playing in a band when I was, technically, I think I was 12 years old when my buddy Dan and we started a band. Neither of us could play an instrument and decided that music was what we wanted to do. My older brother played in quite a well-known kind of Australian punk band. My older sister was a music photographer in Sydney. So I kind of grew up going to gigs on the weekends with my mum, and, I'd always been around that world. So we started a band, and then at 14, we actually learned our instruments. We played in this kind of pop punk band that got signed. And so pretty much from 14, it's like, every waking moment I had, I was on tour or I was playing shows.
Crazy.
And then I think at about 16 or 17, I started teching in Australia. And I started to realize that, like, if I wanted to stay in music, I needed to just expand to anything I could do that kept me within the world. So, between all the way back then and right now, I've been a booking agent. I've worked in management, tour management and production management, any kind of little aspect of music that furthered my skills. And sitting here right now, all those little like pieces have added to me being a better guitar tech or a better tour manager or like what I'm currently doing. So yeah, it's always kind of been the plan. And yeah, I don't know. I guess a lot of it was luck and placement. But yeah, ever since 14, I think that I just realized I wasn't good at anything else.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
That's
Very
awesome.
cool. I don't want to steal all the questions right off the top. I have a long list. Like, we'll probably be here for about 4 hours, but I'll pass off to one of you guys if you guys want to get in on this as well.
Brian, I don't want to cut you off. Are you ready with some questions, or can I start?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
All right.
Out of it.
Yes, thank you. We aim for politeness, and we're all very cordial here. Well, welcome, Marcus. It's so nice to have you. Well, first of all, before we get started, we found out before we started getting into the podcast that you and I have both spent a considerable amount of time in Western Australia, Perth. But my question for you first is, who is your favorite Australian pop artist of all time? I know I have mine, but I'm curious what yours is.
Specifically pop?
Well, let's start with pop, since that might be something that people have heard of.
I don't think you can go past
Besides
Savage
Savage, yeah.
Were you about to say besides Savage Garden? No, you can't go past.
Or I was going to say Tina. I was going to say
tour.
Tina Arena, but I knew that would be your
Strong
pick.
choice.
Yeah.
Man, we were recently on tour. Literally, it's funny you bring this up. A week ago, we were on a tour bus and we were listening to Savage Garden, and I was with a bunch of American crew and a mix of Australians and New Zealanders. And it's shocking how many hits they've had and how many songs everybody knows.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's 30 plus number one singles in the US. Crazy, man. So my hats off and my vote goes to Savage Garden.
Yeah, I think they all live in LA now, though.
Yeah.
Is it bad that I never knew they were Australian? I had no idea.
I think there's a whole like Jimmy Kimmel TV special where Darren Hayes, I think his name is, from Savage Garden goes and interviews people on the street and plays them songs, and they're like, I love this song, it's my favorite song ever, and no one realizes that that's the guy that sings the song.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's a running joke that no one has any idea.
The band that everyone's heard but no one has seen.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about them too is some of their earlier hits are the production is so different than the stuff that came out maybe in like the early 2000s. Like the 90s stuff is more like, I don't know, like dance-ish. Like it has a lot more.
Yeah, it's pretty bold, right?
Yeah,
it's crazy that like a band from Sydney, I think they're from Brisbane, I think like crazy that a small little duo, even that is weird to be a duo. Like everyone was in a band or a pop star. It's like, two dudes took over the world for a solid 10 years. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I love that this podcast is now just about Savage Garden. Welcome back to the Savage Garden podcast.
Yeah. Hit by hit. They have enough content to talk about for a while.
That's true.
I think they're of course great. Now, the next question that I have, now that we've gotten that out of the way, is you've teched with so many different artists. I want to know who has the most peculiar setup or requests for the way that they want their guitar given to them, if you're allowed to say, of any of the illustrious list of artists, and what made it so unusual. Because sometimes I always think, like, for example, and I want to get this over to you quickly, but I always thought that, Robin Ford would have had this amazing like Telecaster that, he's known to be using. And then one time he let me play it and I was like, man, this thing's like really hard to play. And like, it wasn't the idea of this Telecaster that I had in my head. I was like, gosh, man, the action's really high. And, that's just the way that he likes it or has become used to it, or maybe just hadn't been maintained in a long time when I got to it. But there's always stories about how guys have sort of peculiar setups and things like that. So I'm curious if there's any that stand out that are remarkable.
I think Lindsey Buckingham's setup is insane. Stan,
with his Rick
tech,
Turners.
Yeah, his Rick Turners and like these, Trace Elliott acoustic guitar amps that are on 12, and like it's a really bizarre rig. And I think a lot of great guitarists that I've been around or had the privilege to be around, Neil Finn, Mike Campbell from the Heartbreakers is the same. If anybody else plays their rig, it sounds horrible, but then they play it and you're like, so weird, because now it sounds great. Like that frequency that when I played it was there is no longer there for some reason. Like, so I think Lindsey Buckingham's up there. Mark Campbell's, him and his tech chinner, I had, a pretty good run with them on Fleetwood Mac, and like his guitars aren't really set up. They never get cleaned. They're not allowed to touch, like, they don't do any kind of maintenance to the guitars. So they're like as is from, Heartbreakers era in the 80s. A lot of the actions don't really get adjusted. Campbell's kind of like, if it makes a sound, then it's good, so don't do anything to it.
Crazy.
So similar to your story, Mason, it's like I picked up so many, like that White Falcon of his Nocaster, his famous Nocaster, and like they're not fun to play. And anybody else would be like,
Yeah.
So I think that every artist, every famous or iconic artist has some element of that. I know, like nothing strikes me straight off the bat where I'm like, this was super weird. But yeah, Lindsey Buckingham's rig is probably the craziest.
Yeah, and he still use Mesa Boogies for the electric guitar?
Yep, with so much treble. It's it's treble city. And again, Stan, who's his full-time tech, would play, and I would be like, man, my ears. But then when Lindsey plays, because he plays with his nails in this really obscure kind of almost a finger-picking way, all of that tone is gone. So he has to add so much treble to his playing to kind of get that rounded sound from his fingernails. But then if you use a pick, it's back. So,
which I think that's like a really cool, that's great insight for us as guitar players listening to you talk. You cannot just copy and paste someone else's rig, whoever it might be.
No.
You have to actually put in the work, which we talk about a lot on the podcast. Like you have to do the work and put in the hard yards to find your sound. And if you just copy and paste, you could do exactly what you're saying. You could end up with the worst sounding rig because you don't have the same experience, the same technique. You don't have the same approach to playing that maybe some of these other artists do. So you really just have to maybe take some inspiration, but you can't just be lazy and copy and paste and go from there and sound awesome. It just won't work.
Yeah, 100%. That's something I've learned. I think, the deeper into my career I've gotten, like, I don't know about you guys, but like there are certain pedals that I just can't ever use. Like a tube screamer is a perfect example. I've worked for so many amazing bands that use tube screamers as their main, like DMAs, Manchester Orchestra, like some of my favorite guitar tones growing up. And every time I play with a tube screamer, it sounds awful, and I don't understand. I've had really good tube screamers on my board, and I'm like, this is the one. Here it goes, and I plug it in. I'm like, what? Like, I don't get it.
Your fingers are too mid-range. I think it's the problem, Marcus, is that you were born with mid-range fingers, and I'm sorry.
And that's the makeover thing that you discussed, right?
Exactly.
We're going to remove your fingers and start fresh.
Put you on a finger diet right away.
Yeah. No, we're gonna replace you with the Terminator hand on your fretting hand.
So much trouble on that hand. But I think that's really interesting. That's something I've definitely learned that, like, I think maybe Grant, we touched on it once when we spoke, and it's like you kind of come in as this tech. At some point of your career, you start not knowing a whole lot, and you learn from the people around you. Then at some point, there's a shift where you actually know more than some of the artists you're working for. And that's a weird kind of shift. And initially you're like, okay, cool. It's my job to come in here and explain how things should be, or explain how they could do things better. But ultimately, it's not actually accurate. It's like, imagine the first person who teched for Nirvana, like, would have been like, that is a terrible combination of amp and guitar, or your tone is horrible. And then all of a sudden, here we are years later, and this, Kurt Cobain's tone is so iconic. And so I kind of realized at this point in my career that every single gig you go into, there's no such thing as like, sure, you can make little improvements, but essentially the tone that's there that exists from that artist is their tone, and they're there for a reason. And so my job is to come in and understand that tone. And I think you can polish it and you can clean up a signal and can make it more reliable and things like that. But ultimately, I never want to alter the tone specifically. And I think that comes back to what we're talking about. It's like their tone is their tone. It can't be my tone. It can't be yours. It can't be Mason's. Like it's not possible.
Yeah.
I love that.
Maybe that's changing in the days of Kemper and stuff. Maybe it's more feasible now, because you have less components that can change, right? Like we have more sustainable things like Kemper's digital amps, digital tones, and pedals that can be replicated perfectly. So maybe that's changing, but definitely for the older guys using valve amps and, old guitars that are wired backwards and all those kinds of strange things you come across, I think that's the case.
I had on my list of questions was around Kempers specifically, amp modelers, all that stuff. So I'm going to ask you that right after doing a quick, I want to tell you guys about some of our sponsors. Both you guys here, Marcus, Mason, Brian, and our listeners. The first one is Guitar Sanctuary. We joke about this, but we're also kind of serious. Brian loves this place so much that he's there right now. You cannot get Brian to leave the Guitar Sanctuary. All the gear that we're talking about and about to talk about, Kempers
all of his
being
children
one of
were
them,
born in the Guitar Sanctuary.
in the Guitar Sanctuary.
And named after guitars.
Exactly. What a place. Little Gretchy.
Get out of here, Fender.
Just the cutest kid.
Sorry.
This is my son Doozen.
And so the Guitar Sanctuary, we have all guys, come on. Trying to do a really serious ad.
My children are doozies, so.
So
Sorry,
whether you want to, thank you, Marcus, just bringing it back down to earth here.
Yeah.
Whether you need any of the gear we're talking about or, something else that we haven't touched on, it will be available at the Guitar Sanctuary for you. And of course, Brian, the Omilion official, can set that gear up for you on a pedal board once you've got it and get you onto, maybe playing for an artist that Marcus is going to be teching for or playing alongside you with in the near future. Who knows? So check out the guitarsanctuary.com for all of your gearing needs. The other sponsor I want to tell you guys about quickly is monocreators.com. Whether you need a dual soft gig bag for, your Les Paul and your Telly, or you need a pedal board with tons of room underneath, like I always need, like a mono pedal board. They also do a flat series, or you need a backpack to carry all of your, all of your milk bottles and formula like Brian does with all his kids running around the Guitar Sanctuary. Monocreators.com is the place to go. My favorite soft bags, favorite angled pedal board with all that room underneath and accessories. Definitely one to check out. And you can use the code Chairmen, CHAIRMEN, to get 10% off. And now I want to ask my Kemper question. It might be controversial. You may have a clear answer. You may play the fence. I'm not sure, Marcus, but you get to play with some of the best vintage gear, current gear, you name it.
Yeah.
You get to play the best stuff that is around. And then Kemper, Universal Audio, Strymon Iridium, ACS1, all this amp modeling type stuff comes around. What is your take on it? Does it have a place at the level of rigs that you're working on, touring around the world, or is it not? We have the budget for real amps. We have the budget for, the best gear around, so we don't even touch it. What's your opinion and kind of your experience here?
I think the answer goes both ways. I think it definitely has a place for a lot of bands, and I think it's level specific. I mean, if you're talking about Fleetwood Mac, for example, where the records are so tone based, I don't think it has a place there, and nor does it need to. We have such insane budgets, and we already have 30 trucks on that tour at least at all times, and A and B rigs flipping each other and stuff. Like there really isn't a need on something like that. But like on Kendrick Lamar, it's a perfect example of we use digital amps because I don't think like the tones that are on the record aren't valve amps, they're modern, so they probably originally came from a Kemper anyway, and then it gets mixed into such a loud kind of hip-hop mix, and the band in the Kendrick Lamar show is not the focus point. You know, they're off stage and they're playing alongside with Kendrick. So we're doing everything we can to make sure Kendrick has the right mix and everything he needs to perform. So a digital amp's actually in that scenario way better, I think. And it's great. You know, we have 2 or 3 road cases for 4 dudes and everything's inside it. Everything's just like lit off every day, roll into the side of stage, plug in. So festivals and stuff, we can be up and running in 10 minutes, you know. So definitely a time and place for everything. I think it's also genre specific, you know, like friends of ours that I was just on tour with work with the Australian band Parkway Drive, and they're all campers, and we were kind of discussing it, and their tones are incredible. Like I think high gain tones coming out of a Kemper or a Fractal or any of those kind of things are flawless and better, because I think when you're running so much gain and volume, the actual sag from the tubes and kind of all the components can actually take you into like high-end uncomfortable world, whereas a Kemper holds together perfectly. So I think if you're playing any kind of high gain metal stuff, I think a Kemper is amazing. Pop stuff where you're doing kind of mainly effective cleans, I think it's amazing. I actually think the only time I don't agree with them hugely is when you want transparent overdrive, like, you know, your Tom Petty and Heartbreakers classic telly through a Fender kind of sound. I don't think they get there. In saying that though, like, you know, I as you kind of touched on, Grant, I played guitar for a long time for a living, and I used a Kemper and I just ran a Tim overdrive pedal in front of it and ran it through a cab. I never DI'd it, and it was awesome. It was great. Was it as good as, you know, the 60s, 70s amp? Absolutely not. But like, does anyone care?
Yeah. Crazy, man. Because I was curious with that. Like, if you kind of, let's say you're going on a new leg of a tour, if you breathe a bit of a sigh of relief, if there's no vintage amps that'll need servicing probably multiple times throughout the tour, it's like, oh, I just need to plug in every night. I have a B rack with another Kemper on it just in case. And, you know, your life is that much easier. Or is it not kind of the case?
No, not the case at all. And that's just me. Like I think Kendrick and, well, even on Kendrick, you know, we still had amps. They weren't overly used in the mix, but we still always did have an amp behind the player. Childish Gambino, same thing. So every hip hop show I've done, we still had some form of an amp somewhere for sound for the player. It's not what's taken to front of house, but I've never worked on just a Kemper or fractal gig alone. I've always had something else, but I think I'd be bored, to be honest. As a tech, I like the adventure of like, I have no idea what's going to happen today. Like for me, that's why we do it. That's what's exciting. Obviously, you don't want anything to go wrong ever, but that's also kind of like how you learn. Like, you know, you guys are probably sitting there because you're the geniuses that love taking things apart and rebuilding them, right? I know that from knowing the 3 of you and your work. So I think it's the same thing. Like when an amp breaks on tour, like I had 2 weeks ago, I was on tour with Crowded House recently, and I have a Matchless C30, a rack mount, one of the very first prototypes. And then I have a Magnatone panoramic, and both amps within 2 days went down. And so I had them both up on my bench, and I'm not a big amp guy. Alex Nikolai, one of the other techs on tour with, knows a lot more than I do. And so we actually got to like sit down and compare them and like, you know, open everything up. And I think that having that opportunity is amazing. You don't get that stuff with Kempers. Like, you know, with a Kemper, you're like, all right, cool, I'll download a new patch and I'm away. So I think that if you're just doing
relatively unserviceable, you can't really service a Kemper if it's not hardware related, software stuff, you're kind of screwed.
Yeah, exactly. And that's cool. Like that's a whole other thing. And I'm sure that's probably where teching might be going. You know, like I think playback guys now who have a huge, you know, wealth of experience in Abletons and kind of recording softwares and DAWs can now tech, you know, a lot of amps. So I've seen gigs where like the playback guy will have like a rack of Kempers next to him, and everything is obviously getting patch changes and program controls from the playback rig. So technically it's not a guitar tech job, it's kind of a playback job now. So, you know, apart from the guitars, that job might not even exist. I think this is kind of a modern way of doing things, but it's not the way I like to operate.
AI techs.
Yeah, we're all going to be replaced. Yeah.
Oh, no.
Well, so how is it in that Matchless? Because, man, those old ones, I mean, they're sort of like beyond mil spec, so that could almost make it just as difficult to work on. I remember, early days when I was like doing a lot more repairs and stuff like that, having to repair a Mark Sampson era or even the Phil Jameson era Matchless, and those wire looms are like, Brian's pedal boards. You have to like, if you sometimes to get to one solder joint, you have to undo like, 20
everything.
zip ties to get access to that or to rerun one wire.
Yeah, they're stressful, man. I actually had, I would say, the honor to go in and sit with Phil because he's here in LA where I am. And I just sat with him last time he serviced it, and he spoke for 2 hours, and I listened and retained 0% of what he said because he is just a mad genius. He's incredible. And, like, as I said, like, I'm not a huge amp repair guy. And sitting with Phil, I was just so blown away, man. Like, that guy is insane. And Matchresses are made so incredibly well, but so intricately. So, apart from the general first aid kit service on the road, I would send it straight back to Phil. I'm literally going to pick up the Matchless today from the truck and take it to Phil.
Oh, okay.
Nice.
Yeah, it's sort of quick aside about Matchless. I don't you guys, I don't know what everybody's ages are, but when I was a kid and you'd go into a guitar shop in the mid '90s in LA or anywhere, and they carried Matchless, like I think True Tone in Santa Monica had Matchlesses back then. And Matchless would always have a example amp that was housed in a plexiglass enclosure so that you could see the quality of the wiring. And so instead of it being, on a metal chassis and a wood, Tolex covered cabinet, it would be in a plexiglass cabinet in a head, and you could see the wiring. Sick. And so it was very impressive at the time because there really wasn't anything else like that where you could see. There it is. Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah, so those would be in stores, and you could see how they were built. And it was very, very impressive.
Yeah, I mean, they're crazy good. The quality is insane. I'm so glad it's worked its way back into our rig with Neil Finn. For a long time, it's probably a tangent side note, but for a long time, we jumped between amps. On Fleetwood Mac, we had this amazing setup, then we'd go back to Neil Finn stuff or Crowded House stuff, and I'd always be fumbling trying to work out what the right scenario is. And right now, we have this Matchless C30 and then the Magnetone, and it's just the best combo. It's incredible.
All right, so here's a question on Crowded House. So on Don't Dream It's Over, live, now, 30 plus years later.
Yeah.
What is he using to get the tone?
Still the exact same thing. Still a Memory Man pedal. Set to
so it was a Memory Man on the original song?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And was that where the chorus was coming from, or is there a separate chorus?
It's from the Memory Man, yeah. All of the like crazy Neil Finn, and a lot of people on this podcast probably won't even know who Crowded House and Neil Finn are. They're a bit of a deep cut. But when you start listening to it, I mean, he's got some iconic tones.
Oh, yeah.
And his playing is, I mean, he's, out of everyone I've ever worked for, he's by far my favorite player and musician, by far. And tonally, he just stumbles across these strange sounds. Like, you listen to some of his records, like, they were way, way ahead of their time. And a lot of it is a Memory Man. Yeah, when you turn up the warble, like, the chorus effect on Memory Man. Yeah.
So he's using that, no compressor?
No. That guy's never touched a compressor in his life.
Really? I wonder if just in the studio they were adding compressor, because it sounds like a Strat with like a chorus and like a short delay.
Another weird thing, it's a Les Paul, not a Strat.
The Les Paul?
Yeah, it's the same Les Paul we use now.
With humbuckers?
Mm-hmm. With mini buckers, yeah.
Oh, with mini humbuckers.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's like a 70s Les Paul.
Exactly. It's 70s pancake Les Paul. We have two of them. We still got them on the road.
And is it just a boat anchor heavy?
Yeah. It's not as heavy as all Les Pauls, but I would say it's somewhere in the middle of Les Paul weight.
Interesting that it's mini humbuckers. That's so interesting. Yeah, it really sounds like a Strat to me when I hear it, and I wonder, that's an interesting distinction.
Yeah.
We'll have, and I mean, I'm sure most people have heard Don't Dream It's Over. I mean, that they may not recognize it as a Crowded House song, but is he Australian or is he from New Zealand?
He's from New Zealand. The band formed in Australia, in Melbourne. So like Liam and Elroy Finn, his two kids, who are both amazing musicians and now play in Crowded House. They were both born in Australia. So they're kind of like Australians, you know, we have a thing of claiming stuff that's successful that's not ours anyway. Like Grant, for example. 100% not ours, as you can tell by his voice, but he's ours. So they're kind of an Australian band,
My wife is Kiwi, and she will fight for Crowded House till the cows come home.
Yeah.
And that's,
I mean,
it is funny.
Like, if you haven't listened to them, go listen to them now. The guy is so prolific. I mean, Neil Finn is basically since, I think he joined the first band that they were in, Split Ends. He joined that band when he was 15. It was his brother Tim's band. Tim Finn's amazing. The whole family are incredible, but they've basically consistently released at least 2 records every year since then. Minimum. Like, the back catalogue is insane. And I think there's like a very valid reason. Paul McCartney once said in an interview, they were like, what's it like to be the greatest songwriter of all time? And he said, you'd have to ask Neil Finn. And like, that sums it up. Like, the dude is insane. Every single night, we just finished a 3 years worth of touring. So we finished the world tour last week, and every single night the show was different. Never the same set list ever.
Crazy.
And then every single night we get to about halfway through and he goes rogue. He'll just call audibles. So like one night they just all of a sudden did David Bowie Heroes. One night he did Sound of Music for about 25 minutes. And like it sounds ridiculous, but it's so entertaining. And every night I tech, I'm like, I've never been bored of the show. It's been I've worked for him for 8 or 9 years now, and it's like I've never ever gotten bored of watching him.
He's just a riverboat gambler on stage, just going for broke.
But he said on stage the other night. I know we're going on a tangent. Sorry, it went from the Seventh Gun podcast to the Neil Finn. I got so excited I kicked out my microphone. So he said on stage the other night that it comes from he comes from an Irish family where like at a party, or the way that old Irish kind of times where someone sat at a piano and played and they didn't stop playing until it was 4 a.m, and you better know every song that someone requests. And that's how he grew up with the Irish parents. And so it makes total sense that that's his repertoire. He's like, if you yell out a song, I'll know how to play it, or I'll learn it within the first 10 seconds of the song. Like, it's so crazy.
Does he still live in Australia?
He lived in LA actually up until really recently, and he's just gone back to New Zealand. Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay.
That's insane. I have a question. I've been basking in all this behind the scenes talk. I do. No, I love behind the scenes stuff so much that I just have been listening. I do have a question, but before that, I do want to talk about another one of our amazing sponsors. It is Neural DSP. They have a great code for 30% off. All of their computer-based plugins and everything. It does not apply to their quad cortexes or anything, but any new plugin that has been released, this code will be available 90 days after it's been released. I am blanking on the discount code name.
Discount code name for Neural DSP is Chairmen, CHAIRMEN, for 30% off.
Thank you, Mason.
All plugins,
which is a great. I mean, what do we always say? Oh, it's 70% from free.
That's what it is.
70% away.
Hey,
why wouldn't you?
Why wouldn't you? And so go check them out. Like I said, it doesn't apply to their quad cortexes, but go get their plugins.
Yep, plenty. Corey Wong.
Yeah.
All of the stuff. I mean, the Tom Morello one just released. That's a JCM 800. That one sounds amazing. So, in a couple months, that will be on the block for getting 30% off. But in the meantime, I do think that now the Mesa Boogie Mark II C Plus is available because it's been 90 days since the release. So that one's a cool one. So definitely check that one out. So many great ones on there. You can pretty much have any iconic amp, whether it's a Soldano SLO, Mark II C Plus, or cool boutique stuff like the Tone King. It's all there. 30% off, which is 70% away from free. That's how you got to think about it.
Beautiful.
I want to talk to you about our good friends over at Sweetwater and the new program that they have recently launched called the Gear Exchange. And if you're not familiar with the Gear Exchange is, it's sort of a hybrid between, I would say, like a Craigslist and a Reverb. It has sort of the peer-to-peer element, communal element of a Craigslist, but the organization of something closer to a reverb, which allows you to buy and sell your used gears, whether that's pedals, guitars, amplifiers, whatever it is. And the really cool differentiator about the Gear Exchange is that you have an option to not pay any fees as a seller, so you can retain 100% of your earnings. And the way that you can do that is through a Sweetwater gift card. If you put your earnings on a Sweetwater gift card, you get to keep all of your profit. And if you're somebody like me who's ordinarily buying new things on Sweetwater all the time, I just bought a brand new Boss SDE 3000 delay with some of my earnings. That's a great way to make sure you keep all the money that you've made and you're using it on stuff you would be buying anyway. So I really love this service. I highly recommend you check it out. You can set up an account for free at sweetwater.com/used and get buying, get selling right away. I'll pass it back to Grant or Brian. I don't know if you want to keep going, Brian.
Yeah, I do.
Keep going.
I, as someone that is a builder, I think it's funny because people always be like, oh, why do you like being a builder? It's like, oh, I love behind the scenes stuff. So I'm such a nerdy, like behind the scenes documentary person. And I recently got to go, I built some boards for Seal. So I got to go to his concert that was in Dallas. And I was like, backstage, seeing all the playback and the text and everything, and I'm curious, and it surprised me first off to get a call to be asked to do this, to build him some rigs, because I was just like, oh wow, I thought your guitar tech did it, or I thought your whoever tech did it, because my perception has always been like, oh, like I did some like guitar teching back when I was 16, 17, and I did everything. I like assembled the racks, I assembled the boards, and they're like, oh no, well we send it off to there, and I'm seeing more and more Besttronics, who was one of our sponsors, doing all these fly racks for like quad cortexes and stuff. Yeah. So I'm curious for like you, how often are you setting up, like when the stage is all set up and all the lights and everything up and audio is being ran, are you setting up the amps or the racks, or like what are you in charge of besides obviously the instruments and everything? Are you like, I've seen Metallica's behind the scene videos, I've seen their switching stuff, playback stuff is being switched from the playback tech and stuff. Like, I guess what do you get to handle? That's what I'm always been curious of.
I always operate under the guise of like anything that will affect my person's tone, I guess performance is maybe a better way to say it, I will be across. I think that might be tech specific, but I enjoy, like you, Brian, like I enjoy the behind the scenes stuff and the building stuff and everything like that. So I've always been one to set up absolutely everything. So, the pedal board will go out, the amps will go out, we'll run looms, and then we set up switcher racks if we have them, offstage amps, and then kind of like once everything that is show related is set up, wired up, and you run tone, then you kind of work on guitars and spend the rest of the hours doing that stuff. And I do think that's very specific, because like I know that some of the older tech guys that have switching racks, they don't want to touch that. So maybe the playback guy will run all their MIDI cables or whatever, but each to their own. I just think that I learned that if my guy or girl has a bad performance and they walk off pissed off, I'm the first person they look at, and I should have the answer as to why that went wrong. And so I've always kind of operated thinking that, whether that be he has a hot ginger tea, if that's what he drinks on stage, that should be my job, not the assistant's job. And if the guitar is wrong, that's my job. And if an amp goes down, it's my job. And if he's not getting MIDI switching, that's also my job. And then that way, like, I control those elements, I can lean on people in different departments, whether that be audio or not. One of the common arguments we have all the time on tour is when we go to an arena show, we want redundancies for everything, right? The old saying, 2 is 1 and 1 is none. So
it's a Spice Girls song, I think.
Yeah, Savage Garden, actually. We always argue with audio because, and I get it, like audio will be at 183 lines or something insane on a show like Fleetwood Mac. Mike Campbell has 9 amplifiers on stage. I had 6, and this is just 2 guys out of 7 on stage. But we need redundancy. So if they've run an acoustic DI, I want 2 lines, and I want a switcher on that personally, because if my acoustic line goes down, I want to be able to flip and instantly get my artist back. And an audio company will be like, well, it'll take us 2 seconds to just pull this out and run an XLR. And so this is the argument we always have, is like, and they'll be like, that's on us. And it's like, it's not on you, because who does the person look at when shit goes bad? Is the tech. They're not like, where is that Clear Audio tech, like looking at, behind the monitor console? He's staring down the soul of me. So I've always operated that way. I think that it does change from person to person. But yeah, I do that. And then to your point, like of Steel dropping the pedal boards to you, I think that's a sign of a really good tech, personally. I think that someone once described it to me, and it's the best thing I've heard about our career, is that we're paramedics and you guys are the doctors. So we do things like we triage, we go out on scene and we find the problem. We stop the bleeding, essentially, and then we take it to the doctor, and the doctor stops the problem. And ever since I heard that, I was like, that's exactly right. I used to try and fix things that I wasn't across. And sometimes, sure, you've got to pull something apart and be on YouTube and try and learn on the fly. But, like, for example, my forte is in teching is probably more in, like, building pedal boards, knowing how to flawlessly kind of run a show. Obviously, I know a lot about guitars and I work on them every day. But like, if I have the opportunity to take my guitar to Bill Asher in LA and get him to do my fret dresses or fret replacement, I will do that all day. Because like, I'm here and he's there. Why would I do it? Like, I don't fix my own car. Like, I take it to a mechanic. And I think like that's the same with you guys. Like, I'm sure that Steel's tech is incredible and could 100% build a fantastic pedal board. But you build them all day long immaculately. So, like, why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And I take my car to Billy Asher too. That's
awesome. Yeah, no, I've always that was like the thing. Like I even said to my wife, I'm like, babe, like I get to go backstage. Like growing up, you go to these amazing shows and you see all this crazy stuff, and you're just like, oh, I wonder what it's going backstage, and everyone like backstage is like, just chilling, doing their job, hustling to get and I'm like, oh wow, it's not as this like crazy. But when the gig is going before the show and during the show, like, everyone's got their ears and they're all listening, they're all doing their job, and it was really cool. But yeah, I put out a couple of YouTube videos on like building the board, and people are like, oh wow, I'm surprised they didn't have their tech do this. I'm surprised they didn't have this do that. And I'm like, well, I have a couple of friends that are like, one of them, he lives in Nashville. He's the tech for Bruce Springsteen, and he's like, I just don't have he's like, I build rigs and I just don't have the time to do it while I'm on tour, because I'm doing all this other stuff. So depending, like, he's like, I can fix a cable if it gets ripped out. He's like, but depending on the thing, like, stuff gets sent out to other people that can do it. So yeah.
And you can't walk away, like we have our workbenches, like our road cases on tour. And the most annoying thing in the world when you work on something over 4 or 5 days, like it happens all the time. Like if you're in, certain parts of America or certain parts of Australia is actually a big problem. There's not a lot of repair people out there. So if something happens, you might have to do stuff. It's so annoying that at the end of those few hours, you have to pack everything up and shut your road case. And then the next day, reset everything back up to keep working on the guitar. So it's not as, friendly as you may think to kind of get things done out on the road.
Yeah, when something goes down in Darwin, you're in trouble.
We had that on this last tour. It was a nightmare. Yeah, things go down in Darwin. You're like, oh my God, there's nothing in,
Did you guys do Broome?
Australia. We didn't do Broome on this tour, actually. I've done it.
That would have been just as bad.
These are some deep Australian cuts again. Yeah. Everyone listening to the podcast is like,
Geography, Savage Guard. We got everything we're covering today.
Yeah.
The thing that the thing that I love hearing about you chatting about all this, even from you mentioned in passing a few minutes ago about getting him a ginger tea, is it sounds like as a tech,
that's a deep cut. That's a tech deep cut.
That's like, take notes, people. But it sounds like you just obviously there's certain things that you can't do. It's not in your job description, but at the same time, it sounds like a healthy dose of humility that you have to have as well. Of if you can help, even if it's not in your job description, you will. because it's all about making the show great rather than about doing your individual job really well. Like there's a bigger picture, it seems like you have. And I know we've chatted before, Marcus. I've talked to other people I've interviewed. And it seems like one of the most important things you can do if you're going to work in the music industry is be a decent human being and treat people well. Like that comes up all the time. It's not like number one is not your guitar skill. It's not your teching skill. It's like, are you fun to be around?
Absolutely.
And,
yeah. I mean, you're forced onto a bus, like a tiny little space to live with someone for, could be 3 years. Fleetwood Mac went for 3 years. Like that's a long time. And I can tell you truthfully, it is normally our first priority to weed out people who just aren't a part of the team and are making problems for everybody, because you just can't have it. Like it's so many people. If you're talking about an arena tour or a stadium tour, you're 150 to 300 people, and everything has to work cohesively. And you have lack of sleep. You have possibly drugs and alcohol. People having beers after work at 2 a.m. So there's mood effectors there. There's people missing their family and things going on at home. Like there are so many complexities to what we do for a living, that if you put just a general bad attitude into that mix, everything goes to hell. And if you look at the most successful artists in the world, Paul McCartney's, Bruce Springsteen's, Fleetwood Mac's, whatever, they've had the same crew for 20 plus years, I guarantee it. Maybe one or two people, like, obviously I came into Fleetwood Mac and I think I was the first guitar tech, or the newest guitar tech in quite some time. And I think that there are people that have been there for 25 years, and that's not by chance. That's because people find their people and then they stick and they stay, because, the attitude thing is such a huge part of it. And then coming back to the teching aspect of it, if someone's thinking about teching, I just think that the way you become reliable in life is to be the first person. And sometimes that means you're going to cop a storm that wasn't yours. Like maybe your artist is going to walk off stage pissed off at you, like we said, because there was no redundant audio line, for example. But that also means that if you're willing to own those mistakes and be across them, you're narrowing down the amount of them that happen. You have more control, and then you're becoming the more reliable person. So thus, like, instilling yourself into someone's career far more, like Neil during Crowded House or Fleetwood Mac will turn to me and ask questions. Stevie Nicks asked me to fix the lighting on a show during Dreams once. And like, I'm clearly not a lighting guy at all, nor do I actually work for Stevie Nicks. But she was having a bad time on stage, and she knows, obviously, because of watching me with Neil, that I will go about my business to fix anything. Any of us would, any of the techs on that. And I think that's really important. It's like nothing is above or below you. Our job, no matter how much you get paid, is to make sure that kick-ass show and the audience walk away happy. Mm-hmm. That's the bottom line.
Love it.
Yeah,
I'm really glad though that you did talk about sort of the earlier about the paramedic doctor thing, because I do feel like one of the experiences that I've had over time is that there's a lot of protectiveness that technicians have over the artists that they work for. And sometimes maybe to an unhealthy level, to sort of maybe understand where something is a delegation for the betterment of the artist, and then where something is sort of just kind of gatekeeping. Yeah. And I've sort of experienced that over time working with different artists, and sometimes it can take quite a bit of time for a technician to warm up to the idea of somebody else maybe replacing some maybe singular one-time product that would be something that they may have ordinarily done, whether that's to free them up for more time to do other things, or to maybe execute something in a little bit more roadworthy way, whatever the case may be. So it can be an interesting dynamic, but I'm hoping that maybe more of the next gen technicians are more in alignment with the way that you see it. Because I've had situations where I'd worked with artists and asking questions of the tech, kind of being connected by the artist with the technician, and the technician not really being particularly forthcoming. Yeah. And it's not really like you can go like tattletale to the artist and be like, hey, your tech is kind of stonewalling me here. When I asked them sort of specifics, almost like maybe an inadvertent sabotage or maybe a deliberate sabotage in some ways. So I've had that experience. I've also had great experiences, but it has been interesting. Typically, it was like old guard sort of techs, that are sort of like carryovers from the 70s. That they've always done it this way, and damn it if they're not going to do it that way for another 30 years.
Yeah, I think there are a few elements to it. I mean, it's human nature, right, to be protective of what you got to some degree, to some element. But I really learned, I think I said to you, Grant, once, like when I came into Fleetwood Mac, I jumped all these tiers of teching, right? Like I kind of skipped from where I was at, which was a good level. I probably had another 10 years really before I got called up for a job like that. And luck and fate kind of had me positioned there. And I got to learn all of a sudden from, in my opinion, the absolute best techs in the world. They're known for having the best of the best. And those guys are not like that at all. They're not protective of their gear. They're so open to modern, technology and learning from people. And I kind of had to look at myself and be like, how could I be, I was quite protective of my stuff. And like as an Australian tech and a guy who's not worked with these huge bands, but then I meet someone who's worked for Eric Clapton, Tom Petty, U2, and they're not like that. So it was this huge identity check all of a sudden. And whilst it's human nature to be protective, I think it's better to just be able to kind of go into every scenario and not be protective, because I think that ultimately, if you're great at your job, you never have anything to worry about. That one of the guys on tour said that, basically like if the gig is meant to be yours, you can happily allow anyone in, it will forever be yours. And if it's not meant to be yours, it won't be yours anymore. Like there's no use trying to be protective of a gig. It doesn't end well. To just go about your business confidently, know that you're fantastic at your job, be across everything, and then move forward with life.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's philosophy, man.
Yeah.
And now we're in philosophy.
Nietzsche said that, I think.
You say Avicii said that?
Avicii said that. Yes, the greatest philosopher.
The great DJ and philosopher.
Avicii and Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche. The DJ, I mean, not the philosopher. I think we need a break for a second to speak about a couple of sponsors. Brian, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, of course. The first one, and this is definitely a go-to if you're building your own your own rig or anything, or you DIY it, as Bestronics. Brad with Bestronics, Best Brad. He is always able to ship out stuff. I think I emailed him something this morning and I already got an email confirmation that everything was ready to go. And so they handle cabling, looms, rack stuff, plugs, square plugs, text flex. They handle all sorts of stuff. They're building redundant quad cortex rigs, so they have all the rack trays and all the touring supplies, power. The funny thing is, like, the most common question I get is, where do you get those little DC plugs for like your pedal boards? And I'm like, it's just a DC plug. Bestronics. Go over there. They have a discount code DACHAIRS, DACHAIRS, for 10% off their order. Go check them out. They're the best.
Yeah, of all the Tronics, they are.
Of all the
Tronics,
they're the best of all the Tronics.
They are the best. I think they get number one in Tronics. I also want to speak to you about one of our sponsors, our friends over at Stringjoy. If you're somebody like me that is a string destroyer, I know that I would be Marcus's worst nightmare as a technician, because literally, if he allowed me to touch any of his artists' guitars before they went on stage, their strings would invariably be corroded before they even were able to touch them. That's just, chemically how I'm built. And I've struggled always to find strings that work really, really well, and have really sort of been relegated to using exclusively coated strings as a consequence of that, until I found Stringjoy. For whatever reason, whatever the specialty metal alloys that it is that they use, I can finally use an uncoated string and have longevity from the string, where it sounds great, has the performance of an uncoated string because it is uncoated, but have the longevity of a coated string. And they also even offer coated strings, which I've yet to try, but why would I? Because these just work absolutely great. Check out our friends over at Stringjoy at stringjoy.com. They're offering 10% off using the codes BOARDS, BOARDS. 10% off your entire order. They also have subscription services, so you can get strings delivered to your home every single month, or whatever cadence it is that you want. and you get that same 10% off code, and you never run out of strings. You never have to make a last minute run to Guitar Center or whatever it is to get some strings that maybe you're not 100% satisfied with. Stringjoy is amazing, made right here in the USA in Nashville, Tennessee. Check out stringjoy.com. All right.
Beautiful.
I do have a question. Can I ask one?
We all have a question.
Sorry. We all maybe a final questions. I'm curious. So going into obviously some of these bands you have as a tech been with for years, so you know their stuff. But like does it ever change? I mean, obviously you said some of these people are still playing the same gear that they've been playing for years. Say like a new artist, do you typically get like a rundown of like the gear that they're using? Like, do you just kind of have to like learn it all and like figure out like if it's a new piece of equipment, say like a quad cortex, do you have to know the front and back end of everything? Obviously you're going to do anything and everything you can to know how to use the equipment for that artist and everything. But do you get a list of these are the guitars, these are the pedals, these are the amps, and you kind of have to like give yourself like a history lesson in how things work, or like, do you have to prepare yourself? Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, you have to do your research. Like Lenny Kravitz is a new artist for me. Obviously not a new artist, but for me, I work for Craig Ross, a really incredible, mind-blowing guitarist. And going into that, I will generally watch as much like old kind of YouTube footage as I can. Sometimes there's rig rundowns and things like that. And then you either get introduced to the player themselves or a tech that's departing or a tech that oversees it. Like, so for example, with Lenny Kravitz, as similar to how we are at us, we have a chief of staff, like a person who's kind of across all rigs to some degree. So you'll get kind of put in touch with somebody that will give you either photos or a rundown. A good tech, like I always do a tech Bible. It will have everything from old set lists and what guitars he would use for those songs. For someone prolific like Lenny or Neil or whatever, there's a lot of songs with a lot of changes and capos and tunings and whatnot, to string references for what guitars, the name that they use for the guitars. A lot of people will name their guitars for quick kind of reference, be like, hey, hand me Dolly or whatever, and you need to know what the hell that is. And then photos of the rig set up, and then explanations of where the looms are running. Like Craig Ross's rig on Lenny Kravitz is incredibly convoluted. There's a lot of amps. There's 6 amps running. It's all a switcher. It's very intense. And so day one of that rig, thankfully I'd done enough research, and then my notes were good enough that I could kind of go in and hit the ground running. I think I had 2 hours before he showed up, so I kind of managed to, like, you kind of want to create problems. You want to walk into a rig, pull things out and hear what buzzes and what's popping, and like look around the chain and try and really quickly get a roadmap of the scenario. So yeah, a ton of research goes into it. A good tech will do a great handoff. If it's a new artist, it's kind of fun. You're building something new and it's always changing. So it's kind of a mixture of both, to answer your question.
That's awesome. Thank you. Yeah. I've always been very curious of it. I figured so. I mean, in anything you do, you're going to go and try to, like, it's me, anything I'm doing, I'm going to go research. I'm going on vacation, I'm going to research all these different places and all these different things we're going to do, so I could understand it as a job, do the same. So thank you. I appreciate that. The
more you're talking, the more questions I have to ask. I feel like we could just keep going. You have an amp to drop off though, so I know you've got a big day ahead of you. But basically, I guess the question I really want to know, for the benefit of our listeners and for me selfishly, let's say you're talking to a guitar player, again, that's going to a bigger gig, serious gig. Let's say it's an arena show. What do you want them to show up with to take responsibility for their rig? Let's say they don't have a tech, they want to cover the basics. What do you put in your gig bag as a guitar player to make sure you cover as much as you can without showing up with a truck to cover every possible scenario? What's the first aid kit?
Well, I think that that's a pretty widespread question, but I think there are the basics. Like, obviously you need to have a good quality tuner.
Yep.
You want that tuner to have the ability to mute, obviously. So if you're changing guitars or something, that's a big thing. And funnily enough, something that I guess I assume is common knowledge, but like I recently had a discussion with a friend who's a musician. who's not so gear orientated, just a mind blowing musician. And that was something that came up. I'm like, well, he was like, I don't really have a tuner. I use this one or whatever. I'm like, but how do you mute? Like this is something you need. You want to be able to kill your line in case you need to change cable or a guitar or whatever. So that I think, I wouldn't be suggesting amp wise or anything or rig wise too much. Like I want them to be comfortable. If you're going into that level of touring, maybe your band's just gone from clubs to kind of theaters or theaters to arenas, you want to be comfortable and you want to know your rig to some degree, unless you have a tech that you trust that's always around. I think when you get to high level, you have artists who have no idea how to turn their amps on, and that's totally cool. Like that's our job. But if you're at a level below that, I think you should know your rig pretty well. So reliable cables with redundancy. If you have a stereo rig, for example, you have 2 cables running from your pedalboard to your amp, there should be 3 in that loom, always, at least. You can safely assume that one of those cables will die at some point, if not 4. A really good power supply. I just went through this with a friend who had bought some kind of cheaper power supplies of Amazon and was wondering why he was having issues. Then I put him onto, Strymon O-Highs and those kinds of high quality power supplies. I think a power supply is overlooked all the time. And you guys as pedal builders would very much agree. Power is everything. What else?
Power is power.
Power is power. Yeah. Trademark that right now.
Yeah.
I think that's huge. And then I think just, like I said, redundancy, spare strings and things like that. I mean, it sounds like more entry level stuff. I don't think anyone's rocking up to an arena without this stuff, but having a spare guitar where possible.
How about just a keg of deoxit? I feel like that's something that just have a tap, a keg of deoxit. Just spray your artist down in deoxit before they go on stage.
Those backpack drink bottle things.
Right. Yeah, Camelback. Yeah,
Camelback. Yeah.
Just a bladder of deoxit.
Yeah, I think you just as being a tech for as long as I've been, you just have to go into every scenario and assume the worst. And that's what makes you good at what you do. So if you're a player without a tech, you should be looking at a rig being like, if I lose power, what happens? Especially if you're using things like Kempers and stuff now, like, you really should have redundant power supplies. You should have some kind of power bank, like a UPS. They're not that expensive anymore. They used to be $5 or $10 grand. I think Furman make one for $1,000 now. I think some of the computer companies make one. And all that means is if someone kicks out your power from your rack, your Kemper will keep providing, UPS will provide 20 minutes of power to your rig. Awesome. So you have a second to plug it back in. And I have them in my rigs and I've used them multiple times. I've had some idiot pulling, power from a support band who's gone to power down a whole keyboard rig, for example. And some of those Korg Kronos keyboards take 20 minutes to turn on when they've got stuff on them. Or a playback rig should have redundant power, things like that. So you're looking at your weakest points, not your strongest points.
So you're paid to be a glass half empty kind of guy.
Absolutely. Pessimist always. Yeah.
That's
Thank
good.
you, Marcus, man. This is so cool.
I don't think, I have a lot more questions, but I know we also have to wrap up. Do you guys have any final questions for Marcus?
I don't. I asked my questions. I mean, I could ask more. I mean, like I said, we want to go 2, 3, 4 hours. We got this.
Yeah, exactly.
The only question that I just thought would be an interesting one to close on, and I hope that this is not taken in a negative way, but I wanted to know about the worst, the stage nightmare.
Oh yeah.
In your career so far, you don't have to say who, but what's the most remarkable or maybe comedic, floundering that's occurred in your career so far?
Have you ever handed an artist a guitar with no strings on it, as an example?
I haven't yet, but there's still time.
Or the Slash lights out when he throws the Les Paul in the air and the stage lights go out.
Yeah. I've handed out a string guitars, like capoed wrong. And whenever you do that, I think I've probably done that 2 or 3 times in my life, where you're like, all right, cool, keep it 4, whatever. It's always a song where your artist starts. And it's that horrible thing of the band come in and everyone realizes they're a semitone out from each other. Half the band shifts the semitone up to try and pick up and you're just there melting, away in the corner. I've done that, like, thankfully not on any kind of giant shows, but we've done that. We had that on Fleetwood, actually. One of the keyboards, I guess she knocked something. Christine McVie, rest in peace, like knocked something and put her keyboard up a semitone and started a song, and it was pretty brutal. So it's that semitone out frequency is the worst frequency in the world, right?
It's always
everybody's shoulders
semitone.
go up over their head and like cringe.
Yeah.
But recently, man, we were doing last year we did Glastonbury and Pink Pop and these huge festival runs. We were playing a show, I think it was at a festival in Germany, and Neil's rig just went down, completely stopped, no signal whatsoever. And I was like, I don't understand what's going on. And then, you're in front of 80,000 people, you run out, you're checking things, whatever. I have a method where I chase tone when an artist is on stage. I use a cable tester, like a Behringer or whatever, that generates tone. You flick it down to generate tone. And then I have a patch cable with a tuner on the other end. And I will plug it in to the front of the pedal board and to the back of the pedal board and see if the tone from the cable tester is hitting the tuner. Because you can't make noise, right? Like when things go wrong in your own rigs, you're standing there and you're playing. And if it happens at soundcheck, it's great. You keep playing. When it's during a song and your artist is standing at the mic stand above you and you need to find a problem, there's got to be a way to test tone. So that's my trick, FYI, if anyone wants to steal it.
It's a good hack.
Yeah, it's a great hack, and it was taught to me by an older of mine, and I took it and ran with it. Saved me. So anyway, so I was testing it. I just could not find the pedal board, had no signal, so I've got a replica, identical pedal board. So I dropped a B board, put it down, plugged it in, still had no tone. And then eventually I checked like input cables, and I think I found it. I plugged it in. I walked off stage. He had tone. It goes out again about literally 20 seconds later. And Neil's whole thing, which is what makes him incredible, is to lean into problems. His theory, being an incredible musician and a craftsman, is that when something happens, you don't try to ignore it, you lean into it, and you involve an audience. So the song finishes, Neil's still having issues. I'm covered in sweat in front of 80,000 Germans. And Neil was like, all right, Marcus is going to fix this. We're going to hold for 10. Marcus. And so the whole crowd start chanting because Neil's like leaning into this. And I can't fucking find the problem. I still can't find the problem. Like if at that point it was like a cable, and when you plug in a cable and the sound comes and everyone cheers, that would have been so cool. But it wasn't the case, and I still couldn't find it. So like I had to, in that moment, I basically got up and was like, can you switch to acoustic? It's a totally different line. So he played 3 acoustic songs while I continued to track the problem on stage. And to this day, I don't really know what the problem was. Eventually, I put the A board back. I tested the A board off stage. I had signal. I put it back. I plugged in the exact same cables in the end, except for one cable that was fine. I tested both after the show, and it came back. It was a weird ghost problem. I have no idea. And it's a complex system, like it goes from his guitar to a switcher we have one cable for acoustic and electric, and then a switcher, and then into the pedal board, and then down a big loom into a rack. One head is in the rack, one head's on stage at the speaker cab, 2 DI lines out of the rack. Like there's a lot to test. And I've never had so many things, like I've never not been able to find it quickly, I guess is the answer. That's the only time it's taken me 10 plus minutes. And it's a horrible, horrible feeling. It's just a showstopper. It's not like he's the session guitar player in the back corner. It's like that's the guy who plays and starts most of the songs. And man, it was horrible. And then to have people chanting, like Neil's been joking actually that he's going to create a game show called America's Best Roadie. And they're going to be put in these kind of scenarios, to fix problems. And there's going to be a time where people
No, it needs to be a ninja warrior roadie. Obstacle courses.
We need you to take this 80-pound
while you're
pedal
walking
board
across a support beam. Fix this rig while you're
really
slacklining.
And throughout the whole last tour, he would when things would go wrong, like during a show or whatever, like someone would run out and fix it, and he'd be like, American Ninja Roadie, go into this whole thing on stage about how here comes it, they're trying to fix it. It's pretty funny. So that's been pretty horrible. I've had definitely some challenging times, but that's what you do, It's what we get paid to do.
I think that's one of the most exciting things about, I don't want to say our jobs, because our jobs are all very different, but a job where you can do a whole bunch of legwork on the front end, and there's not 100% certainty. You can still show up, a week later after the rig is perfect, and something can still go wrong. And that's kind of the exciting thing about it. Like you always have to be ready.
That's the adrenaline part.
Exactly, right? And I think that's just kind of half the fun of it is you will never master this, but you can get really good. But it'll
you can
never
get
be
really
perfect.
good, but you can still get taken down by a patch cable.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like that's pretty humbling.
Yeah. So I assume you guys use all solderless cables on tour.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Perfect.
That's my go-to.
If you want to keep things interesting, go solderless.
Amazon's got a set. They're $11. They're great. There's
No,
like 9,000.
if you want to be risky, go with solderless power cables. Really,
wow.
It's the next
really
level.
beef it up.
Yeah, that's when you're just playing roulette. That's
It's
what you do
dicey.
Yep. No risk, no reward, right?
So I guess that's my job in Final. And I guess if anyone's listening to this, the industry is actually desperate for new touring crew. There's actually a huge shortage right now. And I think my advice to you is to just start at the bottom and be cool with starting at the bottom. I think a lot of people are coming in right now and getting pretty big boosts up because there's huge holes in our crewing industry. And I think just take your time and be humble and, work your way up like the rest of us did. And I think it's a great career, It's a really cool job. It's a really great option if you're into music and you're into gear. And I'm always willing to give advice.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Love it. Thank you so much, Marcus.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
That was awesome. Well, I think that's it for today. Re-listen to this podcast again if you need more advice. And man, Marcus, you've been on a bunch of podcasts in the past, interviews, all that. So there's a lot more info. People want to learn more about you. I assume we'll put your Instagram, the Marcus Catanzaro official down below.
I'm going to change it right now. Yeah.
People want to check out your profile. But thanks again so much, man, for your time and your wisdom and kicking us a little bit further down the road to Tone Town in our Mazda Miata. We'll see you guys next week for another episode.
All right.
Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.
Adios.